Well, the thought of the Executioner came after we blew up, well, it was the second block failure we've had through the main web area of the Cummins blocks. We had, our Enforcer takes care of everything from kind of the deck surface down to that main web area, but there was no way to put more strength in the factory block in the main web area. We could have gone to a casting to improve all that stuff, but it would have been heavy, and that's not really what the racers wanted. They wanted lighter weight and stronger at the same time. So that's when we started designing the Executioner. We had the major blow up on the engine dyno, and that's kind of what really pushed the project further forward to improve that.
Well, this is a creation out of Drew's mind, you know, so it's pretty awesome. I mean, they built this billet block a few years ago and just kept adding to it, you know, just a little at a time in the shop. You know, it's kind of a smaller shop for building such a high-dollar engine. You know, it took a lot of man hours as far as Drew and those guys.
The 2020 season was a pretty good season for it. I was pleasantly surprised with how the engine held up throughout everything. We did the seats and how we did the cylinder head, we kind of knew we were pushing the limits on. We tried to do it more like what the gas guys are doing, hoping that it would probably work, kind of expecting that it wouldn't. But if it would have been a lot cheaper and easier to manufacture. So that's the improvements that we're making now, is because we can't do what gas guys do.
We took the pistons out of it after the dyno, but we have not taken the crankshaft or anything out of it because it's got a bed plate built into the bottom of it, so it's really quite the chore to get apart. But so we made 3,200, a little over 3,200 horsepower at that point in time, and we still haven't taken the main bearings out of it since then. So
we did have a failure with the engine, and it was a valve-related failure. We had fought issues with the valve seats moving around in the head. The valve seats are pressed into an aluminum head, and they kept moving. So then the valves wouldn't seal quite right, stuff like that. They settled out though most of the season. Like the very beginning, everything kind of moved, fatigued, and quit moving very much. And they were able to get most of the rest of the season out of it, but we knew we were on borrowed time.
See where this one failed. You can see how far down that seat goes to it starts to be the aluminum.
Yep.
But yeah, that's the point of all this, is to get that.
So now this entire, that's already cut in. And
Yeah, well, so all that machine work that you saw on that other head will all be in that other piece of insert.
Right.
Yes, so it'll be. But for the failure that really happened, it could have been a lot worse. Like it didn't even, there's not even a scratch in the cylinder wall. There's not even, I mean, it beat the piston up a little bit, but the rings still all move. You know, still there's no wear. You can still see our soap on it from when we built it. Like seriously, look at this. So, like even a lot of the industry has problems with the wrist pin bushings beating out of it, or egging, you know, egg out, or
Right.
you'll see it start to roll over on the corners. You'll see the cross hatching will be usually shiny, right? So now that, you know, this thing had, we figured the math, 112,000 PSI is what, 500 bar-ish, you know, give or take. Obviously it changes, but we're talking that much pressure on this wrist pin.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, you can see, look at the, you can still see our measurement marks.
Oh yeah.
That's from our dial or bore gauge. When we slide it in and measure all the bearings.
No kid.
Yeah,
Are any worn, or they all look like that?
every one of them. Even look at the main bearing. I took these out after the dyno to inspect the rings after we ran it on the dyno, just to
Right.
make sure. But it was still on the dyno cart, so we didn't take the bed plate off, obviously, because that's a big deal. So you can see like a lot of this stuff. It's got a little bit of. This is the main load of everything, you know. That's a coating. That's not even to the Babbitt material. That's so like. I'll grab a brand new bearing. I'll show you guys, so you can see. I mean, you're talking over 100 passes at 27-ish, 100 horsepower.
Wow.
You can still see the coating's not even gone. Like
Right.
you literally scratch the coating off with a tool that's made with a measuring device, and it doesn't. I mean, you can. That's
The
proof.
measuring device did more damage than.
So the crankshaft never, ever once touched this material.
Wow.
Like the oil film, never once, even on startups, even on, you know what I mean?
That's pure film strength. doing that.
Exactly. It never even touched, you know? Another big testament, too, to that sort of thing where it holds the cross hatches is the actual bull nose is still on the rings. It's not like, when you got shitty oil or the wrong cross hatch in here, it'll sharpen the rings. It'll make them real sharp, but you can feel that.
Probably because it falls it down a little bit.
Well, yeah, it makes it, yeah, it starts to wear the ring.
Right.
So there's absolutely no wear on that ring whatsoever.
No, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, that thing would cut you. Like if you were to do this.
It'd be basically cutting a fresh.
Yep.
And that's the one that took the heat, too.
Yeah, that's the one that took the valve.
We've used adrenaline racing oil in this engine, and it's performed flawlessly. We've actually always seen like lower crankcase pressures with Hot Shot Secret oils, additives, the adrenaline racing oil, and the first place that we see a lubrication issue is typically in the ring pack and the cylinder walls. So if the oil isn't doing its job and we can't keep a good oil film on the ring pack, we typically see blow-by increase. So Hot Shot Secret's oil has dropped our blow-by in the same engines across the board in every platform that we've ever dealt with.
All right, we've got the Executioner back in the S10. We are trying to get ready for race week. Lynn's still finishing up some nitrous lines. Some new things for this year. Drew did, at D&J, did the top feed injector. So you can see the rail is now over here, and it is fed through the top of the valve cover. We're using an LLY injector instead of the Cummins injector would normally use a feed tube coming in the side. And last year we had twice that we got burned down at the tree. We were on the staging limiter for 7 to 9 seconds, and the engine got hot enough during that staging time that by the end of the pass, our rail pressure had dropped down to 10,000 psi, and we were a couple of miles an hour short of our goal. And to alleviate that problem, between rounds, we would have to pull the rail off, retorque the feed tubes, and go on racing. We went to the top feed setup. Now the aluminum engine can grow without creating a problem with the feed tube and injector not sealing correctly. The other thing that we saw is like towards the end of the season, we had a valve problem on number 6, and that was after 99 passes. And we feel like some of that valve problem was created because he had his valve seats embedded in the aluminum head, and the seats were moving around some. Sometimes we would hear it when it was cold. You could almost hear like a valve leak, and we'd do a burnout. Everything would go away. It would sound great. So he put a whole deck plate, so to speak, front to back of that all the seats are in. So that is what this rose gold colored plate is in here, and there are no valve seats in this. The valve seals are machined. The valves are machined directly onto that plate, and there's no separate valve seals to move around. And that is the reasoning that you see that plate. It runs front to back, and also the C-rings seal onto that, so we don't have, that's a little bit harder material than the aluminum. So a couple things that we saw in the head last year that he wanted to address, that's why we did that. But otherwise, the bottom end, everything looked fantastic. Thanks to Hot Shots, adrenaline racing oils, absolute protection. It was phenomenal to see the cam and the crank and the pistons and the cylinder walls, where everything looked with good oil. And in fact, we still have some of these bearings here. Let me show them to you. Okay, here you have the bearings out of the engine that we ran. These bearings have 99 passes on them at the drag strip and 19 passes on them on the engine dyno. And we made a best of 3,214 horsepower and over 3,000 foot-pounds of torque on the dyno with this. And these bearings literally look brand new. There are still the marks that you can see on that bearing from where they use the dial indicator to measure the bearings when they were brand new. I don't know if you can see that mark right there. That's a light mark they made in the coating from the dial bore indicator. And really, there's a lot of some scratches on these bearings because these things got put in a Ziploc bag when I picked up the engine. But you can see that the bearing was untouched because of the protection of the adrenaline oil. But altogether, it's just a testament of good protection. When you have oil that doesn't shear, it holds its weight and it gives a layer of film protection from your bearing to your crank. It is phenomenal that we can put that much horsepower through that many passes and the bearings still look brand new. So big shout out to Hot Shots and their products. We greatly appreciate their support because we run their fluids top to bottom on the S10, from the engine to the transmission to the rear differential, top of the line products. Okay, we're off to the 2021 race season. We are ready to get started back on the racetrack. We are headed down to Lights Out in Georgia, South Georgia, which is where we left off last fall when we went our 411 at 181 miles per hour. And we are hoping that we've made the necessary changes to see if we can better our times. Hopefully get the Hot Shots S10 into the low 4 category again. And if we're lucky, we really would love to break into that 3-second barrier.